In the age when kings ruled with gold and blood, there was one who dreamed not of power, but of eternity, Solomon, the man who dared to build a dwelling place for God himself. They say his temple shone brighter than the desert sun, its walls layered with pure gold, its stones heavier than mountains, and its silence more sacred than any sound ever heard by men. But here lies the riddle. How could a structure of such magnitude rise 3,000 years ago without iron, without machines, without a single clang of metal? What secret knowledge did these ancient builders possess? What force guided 80,000 men who carved stone from living mountains and 70,000 more who dragged them through the wilderness to build a house for the divine? Some say the answer was lost with the wind. Others believe it was never meant to be found. Tonight we reopen that vault. This is not just history. This is the mystery of how the Temple of Solomon was built and the untold story of the men who gave their lives to raise it. When Solomon ascended the throne, the land of Israel stood at the height of its power. Peace had come after decades of bloodshed under his father David. The nations around him bowed, and gold flowed into Jerusalem like rivers of light. Yet amid all that glory, the young king's eyes were fixed on something no earthly crown could give. He sought not victory but presence, not fame but dwelling. He would build a house for God, not a temple of mortals, but a sanctuary where the infinite might descend among men. But how does a man build a resting place for the eternal? The scriptures say Solomon prayed for wisdom, not wealth. That wisdom became the foundation of the most ambitious project the ancient world had ever seen. He summoned artisans from Tyre, stonemasons from Hebron, carpenters from Lebanon, and scholars of sacred geometry from Egypt's old dynasties. From east to west, messengers rode with sealed scrolls bearing one decree: the house must be perfect, for no hammer shall sound where the Lord will dwell. It was a command that defied reason, a structure of gold and stone built in complete silence. Whispers spread through Jerusalem. How could such a thing be done? Some said Solomon had discovered forbidden knowledge from the ancients. Others believed the angels themselves would lift the stones. And yet the king remained unmoved. If God spoke the universe into existence, he said then, his dwelling must be built in silence, for the divine does not shout, he breathes. The first wave of workers arrived at dawn, tens of thousands, men of every tribe. Some came willingly, others in chains. Beneath the shadow of Mount Moriah, the foundation of faith was about to be laid. The plans were drawn not on parchment, but burned into memory, encoded in the minds of the priests and the architects. No mortal eyes outside the circle of builders were permitted to see the measurements. It was said the design came from heaven itself, revealed to David in a dream, and passed to Solomon in secret. Every dimension, every chamber symbolized the cosmos, the union between heaven and earth. The outer courts mirrored the world of men, the inner sanctum the throne of the unseen God. But with divine design came impossible demands. Stones heavier than 60 elephants, columns that no man could lift, gold so pure it shimmered even in darkness. And one rule above all others: no sound of metal, no hammer, no chisel, no iron could touch the mountain of God. What began as worship now bordered on madness. Could this vision even be built by human hands? Still the command went forth: begin. The silence of dawn was broken only by the rustle of robes and the slow breathing of men who knew they were building eternity. And so in the early light of Jerusalem, the first cut was made not on the mountain, but miles away, deep within the heart of the earth. The story of the Temple of Solomon had begun, and its first miracle would be carved in stone. Now we descend into the quarries where silence met the sound of Kriati. Beneath the shimmering light of Jerusalem's dawn, the mountains around the city echoed not with song, but with silence. It was here in the hidden quarries beyond sight of the Temple Mount that Solomon's greatest challenge began: the shaping of the very bones of God's house. The command was simple, yet impossible: use great and costly stones. But these were not mere building blocks. Each one weighed nearly 400 tons, the size of a small fortress, the weight of 60 elephants. and they were to be carved without iron, without hammer, without sound. 80,000 men were chosen. Some volunteered, believing their labor would echo into eternity. Others were pressed into service, Canaanites, captives, foreigners. Yet all stood equal beneath the shadow of the quarry walls, where light struggled to reach and breath turned to dust. At first light, the labor began. Wooden wedges, water, and prayer. These were their only tools. They traced faint lines on the limestone, following invisible paths whispered by the architects of Tyre. Into the stone they drove the dry wedges, and then they poured water from skins. Hours passed, then a sound. Not of metal, but of earth itself sighing. The wood swelled, the pressure built, and a crack split through the rock like thunder restrained by reverence. One by one the giants fell, not shattered but separated with surgical precision. The workers watched in awe. To them this was no quarry. It was a womb birthing the foundations of the divine. Every strike, every drop of water was an act of faith, but the silence came at a cost. Without the roar of tools, they heard everything. The groaning of stone, the breath of their neighbors, the cries of those caught beneath falling fragments. Accidents were common. Rocks collapsed. Men vanished beneath tons of limestone, their names never recorded, their bodies sealed within the mountain they carved. Still, the work continued. They labored not for glory, but for a promise that when the house of God stood completed, their suffering would no longer be in vain. By night, the air was heavy with smoke from torches. Sparks danced across the quarry walls, illuminating faces hardened by exhaustion and belief. Supervisors walked in silence, measuring every cut with the eye of perfection. No mistake was tolerated. A stone too large, too small, too uneven meant weeks of work lost. And yet each block fit perfectly, impossibly, as if the mountain itself wished to be part of something greater. The deeper they dug, the stranger the light became. Some claimed they saw faint glows within the rock mineral veins that shimmered like gold. Others whispered that angels marked the stones guiding the cracks. None dared speak too loudly, for no sound of iron was allowed, and no voice was louder than obedience. By the end of the 7th year, the quarries had fallen silent once more. The last stone massive, flawless, alive with the memory of 1,000 hands was raised from the depths. The foundation of the temple was complete, but this was only the beginning. For if carving the stones was a miracle, moving them across mountains would demand something even greater. The mountain trembled under their feet. The air was thick, not with thunder, but with dust, and the scent of sweat, limestone, and death. Beneath the blue sky of Israel, 80,000 men became shadows swallowed by the quarries they carved. They called it holy work. But holiness has a cost. Each dawn began with silence, a silence so heavy it pressed against their lungs. Before the sun reached the ridge, they prayed. Some whispered the Psalms of David. Others, chained and beaten, prayed to gods that would never answer. And when the horn sounded, thousands of picks made contact with stone, not to strike but to serve. The work was sacred and deadly. Stones rolled, cliffs collapsed. The cries of the fallen were muffled by the dust. Men vanished beneath slabs of rock that would one day form the walls of God's house. There were no doctors, no laws of mercy, only overseers who counted bodies as they counted stones. When one man fell, another took his place. When one rope snapped, another was tied. The scriptures are silent about their names, but their blood darkened the same earth where Solomon prayed. And yet among them something deeper grew: faith. The Israelites believed they were touching eternity. The Canaanites believed they were cursed to build it. But both felt the same truth: the temple was not just rising from stone, it was rising from them. Midway through the 3rd year, a storm struck. The rains soaked the wood wedges, splitting an entire face of the quarry too soon. A wall of stone collapsed, crushing hundreds. The earth quaked beneath their screams. When the dust cleared, silence returned, not of peace, but of loss. That night, the workers refused to light torches. The quarries lay in darkness like an open tomb. Yet at dawn, they rose again. They did not speak of the dead. They simply kept cutting, as if each blow of obedience might grant salvation to the souls buried below. One old mason was heard saying, "We build for a God who asks for silence but hears the cry of every man who dies in it." That line passed through the camp like prophecy. It became their creed. The overseers began marking each finished stone with symbols, tiny carvings invisible to the eye but known to the craftsman. For some it was pride, for others remembrance. It was the only way they could say I was here. Every block that reached Jerusalem carried not just weight but sacrifice. It was not limestone anymore, it was covenant. By the end of the 5th year, the quarries had become a graveyard and the foundation of the temple, a reliquary of human devotion. They had built the unthinkable and lost countless lives doing it. But the question remained, how could these colossal stones, each weighing hundreds of tons, be moved across the mountains? Without wheels, without iron, without machines. The next miracle awaited. The stones were ready. Now they had to walk. The stones were ready. Each one cut in silence, each one marked with the sign of its destiny. But now came the task that no mortal mind could explain to move them. From the depths of the quarries to the heights of Jerusalem, the distance stretched for miles of rugged earth. Between them lay valleys, cliffs, and desert slopes. No paved roads, no iron wheels, no beasts strong enough to carry a single stone. And yet Solomon's decree was clear. The foundation of the house must rise. 70,000 men were chosen. Rope burned, dust choked, their skin darkened by the sun and scarred by labor. They stood before the first giant stone, nearly 400 tons of carved perfection, and bowed their heads in prayer. Then the command echoed through the valley. Pull. The air filled with grunts, the tension of fiber cords, the deep groan of stone against the earth. Slowly, impossibly, the block began to move inch by inch, heartbeat by heartbeat. They used nothing but thick ropes made from woven palm fibers and wooden rollers cut from the forests of Shephelah. 1,000 men pushed from behind while another 1,000 pulled from the front. Supervisors shouted orders. The rhythm was sacred, the movement ritualistic, a living hymn of strength and submission. But divinity did not spare them from death. A single rope frayed by days of friction snapped. The sound was like thunder. The stone lurched and men screamed as it rolled backward, crushing dozens beneath it. The survivors stood frozen faces pale beneath the dust. Then without a word, they retied the ropes and began again. For every man who fell, another took his place. Their faith was heavier than the stones they moved. At night, the men slept beside their burden. The stones were covered with linen as if to honor the sleeping dead. Fires flickered across the valleys, casting the shadows of men and stone onto the cliff silhouettes of creation itself. Some claimed they saw movement in the night, that the stones glowed faintly as though the Spirit of the Lord guided their journey. Others whispered that angels walked among them, unseen but present, keeping the weight from crushing them all. By the 5th month, the path from the quarries to Jerusalem became a scar across the land, a trail of faith and blood. For every mile gained, another life was lost. Yet the stones continued to rise, carried by thousands of trembling hands. When the first stone reached Mount Moriah, the men wept. It was not triumph, it was release. They had brought the mountain to the mountain. And there at the edge of the city, priests came forward, sprinkling the stones with oil and water. Blessed be the hands that bore the impossible, they said. For these stones remember every name written in dust. But the work was far from over. For beyond the desert, in the high forests of Lebanon, another army of men was at labor cutting the trees that would crown the temple of God. The stones had walked. Now the cedars must fall. Far to the north, where the air turned sharp with the scent of resin and sea, another army labored beneath a different sky. 200 kilometers from Jerusalem, deep in the mountains of Lebanon, 10,000 Israelites and Sidonian lumbermen stood among trees older than empires. The cedars towered like pillars of eternity, roots sunk into stone crowns touching heaven. These were no common trees. They were the breath of the temple, chosen to become the living frame of God's dwelling. The first cut was not made in haste. Priests stood beside the lumbermen, anointing the trunks with oil, whispering blessings before the axes struck. When the blades bit into the bark, the sound rolled through the forest like thunder over water. Some said it was the voice of the trees mourning their fate. Others, the echo of creation itself when God first spoke and matter obeyed. Day after day, the mountain rang with the rhythm of falling giants. Men worked barefoot, balancing on the trunks, slick with sap, swinging bronze blades that dulled by noon. The scent of cedar filled the air, sweet, holy, intoxicating. The logs were marked with symbols: Solomon's seal, Tyre's emblem, and the sign of Yahweh. Each mark meant one thing: sacred purpose. When the harvest was done, the mountain stood bare and solemn like an altar after sacrifice. The cut trunks, some 30 meters long, were dragged to the coast by oxen and men bound together into massive rafts. For days they floated across the Mediterranean, pushed by the winds of Tyre, guided by Phoenician sailors who sang hymns to their sea god Melkart. But the Israelites prayed to another, the one who made the sea itself. Many rafts never reached the shore. Storms broke them apart, lightning struck the wood, entire crews vanished into the depths. Yet each loss seemed to drive the survivors harder, their purpose burning hotter than the sun above them. By the time the first rafts reached Joppa, the sailors fell to their knees, kissing the ground, whispering, "The Lord of Israel rules the waters." From Joppa, the real trial began. 60 kilometers of ascent from sea level to the hills of Jerusalem. No wagons could bear the weight. No beasts could survive the strain. The logs were dragged by hand, bound with ropes thick as wrists. Hundreds of men heaved in rhythm, chanting through gritted teeth. When one stumbled, another caught the rope. When one fell, the line never stopped moving. Those who died on the road were buried beneath the very cedar they pulled. Their graves became milestones on the sacred path. By the time the last beam reached Jerusalem, the men were unrecognizable, skin-torn eyes, hollow spirits aflame. And when they laid the cedars beside the waiting stones, they saw it gold dust glittering in the wind, as if heaven approved their labor. The trees of Lebanon had become the ribs of God's house, the living structure of divine intent. But silence was not finished testing them. For when the building began, a command would be given that turned the temple into the strangest construction site in history, a place where no sound of iron could ever be heard. On Mount Moriah, the world fell quiet. No hammer rang, no chisel struck. The mountain, the very heart of Jerusalem, became a sanctuary of stillness. It was not merely construction now, it was worship. By Solomon's command, no iron tool was to touch the stones of God's house. The law came from Scripture itself, and the house, when it was built, was made of stone made ready before it was brought, so that there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard in the house. The silence was not superstition, it was obedience. For iron, the metal of war, could not echo in a place meant for peace. Each block arrived already shaped, measured to perfection, hundreds of miles away. The quarries had become temples of preparation, the workshops schools of faith. Every stone bore marking symbols and letters carved by the masons to show its destined place. When they reached Jerusalem, builders deciphered those codes like holy scripture, fitting each piece without force. The site was a realm suspended between worlds, physical and divine. No shouting, no arguing, no commands. The only sounds were the whisper of ropes, the brush of linen against stone, the low hum of prayer beneath the wind. A stranger watching from afar might think no one worked at all, and yet the temple rose silently, stone by stone. It was said that even the birds ceased their song when they flew over Moriah. The mountain itself seemed to hold its breath. The builders called this silence the breath of God. They believed every moment without sound drew them closer to His presence. One worker wrote in the dust, "If creation began with a word, then His dwelling must be built by listening." But silence for men is not peace. It is weight. It presses, it magnifies the smallest thought, the faintest doubt. Some could not bear it. They began to whisper at night tales of strange lights above the sight of unseen figures moving among the pillars of a presence watching their every motion. One morning, a young mason dropped a chisel by accident. The metal rang once against the stone, clear, sharp, forbidden. Work stopped instantly. Every head turned. Supervisors descended, faces pale with fear. The law was absolute. The tool was removed. The man was exiled. The sound of that single strike haunted the workers for days, as if it had cracked not stone, but the air between heaven and earth. Yet through this impossible restraint the temple took form. The foundations locked together with the precision of breath and bone. The cedar beams from Lebanon rested atop the golden thresholds. It was said that when the last stone of a wall was set, it gave a sound like a sigh, the sound of completion, not of labor. The temple did not echo with noise. It resonated with presence. It was built not by strength, but by silence, the stillness of men working under divine gaze. And when the walls finally touched the sky, the people of Israel looked upon it and saw something they could not name. It was more than architecture. It was revelation made solid. But the silence was not forever. For soon the fire of creation would return, not in quiet, but in the roar of molten metal and the light of gold. When the last stone was placed and the mountain stood silent, a new sound emerged, the roar of fire. It came not from war nor sacrifice, but from creation itself. In the heart of Jerusalem, flames rose like towers fed by cedar and oil burning day and night. This was the domain of a man unlike any other Hiram of Tyre, the master of bronze and gold. Half Israelite, half Phoenician, he was a craftsman whose skill bordered on the divine. The scriptures describe him as filled with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge to work in gold, silver, and bronze. Some said Solomon found him through King Hiram of Tyre. Others whispered he was chosen by God himself, anointed by fire rather than oil. In Hiram's workshop, the world shimmered. Molds of clay and stone lined the courtyard like tombs waiting to be filled. Bellows groaned, feeding air into the furnaces. Sparks burst into the night like living stars. And in the center, Hiram stood, his skin marked by flame, his eyes reflecting molten light. He was forging the pillars of heaven. 2 bronze giants, each 8 meters tall and weighing 30 tons. They would stand at the entrance of the temple, guardians of mystery. The first Jachin, meaning he establishes. The second Boaz, in him is strength. Their surfaces shimmered like mirrors engraved with lilies, pomegranates, and the symbols of covenant. Every pore was a prayer, every flame a test. Bronze flowed like living blood from the furnaces, filling the molds with divine precision. One mistake, too much air, too little heat, and months of labor would be lost. Yet none were lost. Hiram's hands never faltered. By day, Jerusalem glowed under the reflection of gold and copper. By night, the fires of Hiram's forge painted the city in the color of dawn. The people called it the heart of the temple, for from it came every vessel of worship. The basins, the censers, the lampstands, the chains of gold, and the mighty basin known as the sea. That sea was a wonder in itself, a colossal bowl of cast bronze held aloft by 12 oxen of metal. Each ox faced outward, symbolizing the tribes of Israel, their backs supporting the waters of purification. It took thousands of pounds of metal to create, and when it was complete, its surface gleamed like still water under the sun. In the flames, Hiram saw visions. He said the metal spoke to him, that every alloy had a voice, a will. The workers feared him, for his eyes carried the reflection of things unseen. Some claimed he never slept, that the fire sustained him. Others said he was the only man in Israel who could command the elements without losing his soul. When the final piece was cast and cooled, Hiram stood before the temple gates covered in soot and glory. He had given shape to the unseen, the formless transformed into beauty. His pillars rose toward the heavens like frozen fire, and as the sun set behind Mount Zion, Solomon himself came to see the work. The 2 men, the king of wisdom and the master of fire, stood together in silence. Between them, the entrance of God's house blazed with reflected gold. The stones had been silent. The flames had spoken. Now heaven itself would begin to shine from within. When the last cedar beam was set and the final stone locked into place, Solomon gave a command that would turn the house of God into a mirror of heaven. Gold, more than 27 tons of it, was brought forth from his treasuries, not for crowns, not for weapons, but for walls, floors, and ceilings. Inside the temple, the air shimmered with heat and sanctity. Furnaces blazed in the courtyards as artisans melted bars of pure gold, refining them again and again until the impurities vanished. The molten metal glowed like captured sunlight. When poured, it moved like living fire, the very symbol of divine perfection. The workers hammered the gold into sheets thinner than parchment, so thin they trembled with every breath. They laid each leaf over the cedar walls, pressing it into place with bare, trembling hands. Many collapsed from exhaustion. Some bore burns that would never heal. But none complained. For to them, every strike of the hammer was prayer, every glimmer of metal a reflection of the Almighty. The temple began to glow from within, not by torchlight, but by its own reflection. The gold caught the daylight and multiplied it until even the shadows shone. Every surface became a mirror for holiness. The priests said, "The sun no longer rules in this place, for God himself provides the light." In the innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies, stood two colossal cherubim of olive wood, each 4.5 meters tall. Their wings stretched across the width of the sanctuary, touching wall to wall, and their bodies were covered in hammered gold. The space between their wings would hold the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God on earth. When the cherubim were complete, the artisans wept. They said the air in the chamber felt alive, heavy with unseen presence. Some refused to enter it alone. Others swore they heard whispers, as if the gold remembered the words spoken by God to Moses on Sinai. Outside, the people of Israel watched the temple rise in brilliance, unable to look directly upon it when the sun struck the facade. The city seemed to breathe light. From miles away, travelers saw the glow and thought it was fire, but it was glory. Even the king himself, Solomon the Wise, was said to stand in silence, overcome by the sight. The man who had commanded armies, who had judged nations, now trembled before what human hands had made under divine order. This was more than architecture. It was revelation made solid matter, transformed into majesty. The temple's brilliance blinded those who saw it, but it also burned away the line between heaven and earth. In that glow, the sacred and the human became one. But fire, even holy fire, does not last forever. The gold would shine, yes, yet its brilliance demanded order, control, and devotion. And so Solomon created a system, 150,000 workers, thousands of overseers, a living network that pulsed like the heart of the temple itself. The question was no longer how the temple was built, but how such divine perfection could be sustained by mortal hands. The Temple of Solomon was not only a structure of gold and stone, it was a living machine pulsing with order, rhythm, and faith. 150,000 men moved as if guided by an unseen will. 3,300 supervisors oversaw the work, and above them 550 chief officers answered directly to the king. Each morning began before sunrise. The men gathered in silence at the foot of Mount Moriah. No shouting, no chaos, only prayer. When the horn sounded, they dispersed like the veins of a single body. Every man knew his place, his task, his timing. It was as if heaven itself had written the blueprint of their motion. Every supervisor commanded 45 workers, a perfect balance of strength and precision. Orders passed not through words, but through gestures, a raised hand, a nod, a look. The silence of construction mirrored the silence of faith. 7 years and 255 days, and not a single rebellion, not one halted day. The miracle was not the gold or the cedar, but the discipline that shaped them. It was said that even the weather obeyed the schedule. Rains waited for rest days. Winds stilled when the cedar beams were lifted. Solomon's genius was not just wisdom, it was structure. He built men as carefully as he built walls. He understood what few kings ever have, that divine order requires human obedience. But order came with a price. For those beneath command, the temple was not glory, it was burden. Men worked until their hands bled through the bandages. Bodies broke under the weight of bronze and stone. At night they lay on the ground between the walls they had raised, whispering psalms into the dust. Some believed that to die near the temple was to earn forgiveness. Others feared their souls would be trapped within its stones forever. Among them, rumors spread that the temple itself was alive. Workers swore the stones hummed faintly after midnight, that the air grew heavy as if the mountain itself breathed. Priests said it was the Spirit of God preparing to dwell there. The skeptics said it was madness born from exhaustion. But in a place where silence was sacred, even madness became a kind of worship. Each stage of construction flowed with impossible precision. The stonemasons worked in rhythm with the carpenters, the goldsmiths followed the masons, the priests followed the gold. The temple grew like a tree of light roots in the rock branches reaching toward eternity. And when Solomon walked among the workers, the air itself changed. No one spoke, no one bowed. They simply worked harder, as though the king's presence amplified the holiness of their task. As the 7th year drew near its end, there was no delay, no rebellion, no disease, no famine, only progress. Not a single major accident stopped the work. To the people of Israel, this was proof that God himself was building beside them. The divine machine moved without flaw. But when the last stone was placed, the question remained: what would happen when the machine stopped? What would fill the silence once the final prayer was spoken? The answer would come not from men, but from heaven itself. The final dawn rose over Jerusalem like the calm after creation. 7 years and 255 days of labor, silence, and sacrifice had led to this moment. The last stone had been set. The final plate of gold polished until it reflected the light of the sun and blinded all who looked upon it. Inside the courtyards, priests moved in perfect order. Trumpets gleamed, garments of white linen rippled in the morning wind. The people gathered by the thousands, their faces lifted toward the mountain where the temple stood, the shining heart of Israel. And then, as the Ark of the Covenant was carried toward the Holy of Holies, a hush fell across the multitude. The sound of footsteps ceased. Even the wind seemed to still. It was said that the angels themselves paused to listen. The Ark. The sacred chest that once split the Jordan, that brought victory and judgment, was placed between the wings of the golden cherubim. And in that moment, the silence of 7 years met the sound of eternity. A low hum filled the air, deep as the earth's core, rising until the very stones of the temple vibrated. And then the unthinkable. A cloud descended from above the mountain, not mist, not smoke, but the glory of the Lord. The scriptures say it was so thick, so radiant, that even the priests could not stand to minister. They fell to their knees, faces to the floor, blinded by the brilliance of the presence. The air was alive, a storm without thunder, fire without flame. Light poured through the golden halls like liquid dawn. The people outside saw it and cried out as one voice, for the mountain itself seemed to breathe. Solomon stepped forward. The king, who had conquered nothing but time, now lifted his hands toward heaven and prayed. The Lord said he would dwell in thick darkness. But I have built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell forever. The crowd answered with tears. Trumpets blared, harps and cymbals roared like the sea. The smoke of sacrifices rose into the sky, 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep, a nation's offering of gratitude and fear. From that day, Jerusalem was no longer just a city. It was the center of the world, the place where heaven had touched earth. The temple glowed for miles, its gold mirroring the light of the presence inside. Travelers said it looked alive, as if breathing with the heart of God himself. And yet beneath that beauty lingered an echo, a whisper of warning. Every man who had touched the temple knew the cost. Blood in the dust bones beneath the stones, prayers whispered in silence. A house for the infinite built by mortal hands. But the glory of God is not something man can contain forever. The same fire that descends can one day consume. The same light that fills can one day depart. For now the story ends in radiance. The impossible had been done. Heaven had found a home. But stay for what comes next, a reflection for those who still search for the presence long after the cloud has gone. The message that remains for the faithful, the weary, and the wise. When the cloud lifted, the world was never the same. The temple stood finished, but its true foundation was not stone or gold, it was devotion. The story of Solomon's temple is not just about architecture, It is about endurance, obedience, and purpose. Every worker, every scar, every silent prayer became part of something eternal. And perhaps that is the lesson for us, especially in the later chapters of life. We may no longer lift stones or carve wood, but we still build with our words, our kindness, our faith, and the wisdom we leave behind. Time will one day dismantle every monument. Gold fades, walls fall, even memory erodes. But the spirit behind the work, the love, the patience, the reverence, that is what endures. So let the story of Solomon's temple remind you your life too is a temple being built. Every hardship shapes its foundation. Every act of compassion lays another stone. And when your own final day arrives, may you stand as Solomon once did before what you have built in faith and hear the silent voice that says, "Well done." Because glory was never in the gold. It was always in the heart that dared to build for God. The Temple of Solomon began as a dream, a vision carved in silence, forged in fire, and sanctified by sacrifice. It was built by men who believed that their labor could reach eternity, that their pain could become praise. In the end, it wasn't the gold, the cedar, or the stone that made it sacred. It was the faith that shaped them. Now the temple stands only in memory. Its walls are gone, its glory turned to dust. But what it represented, devotion, purpose, the human longing to touch the divine, still endures. Each of us builds temples of our own in our families, our faith, our lives. And just like Solomon's, they are built not by strength but by silence, not by power but by heart. If this story spoke to you, let it live on. Share it not as a video but as a reflection. Leave your thoughts below. Tell us what it stirred in you, and stay with us as we uncover the next mystery hidden within Scripture. Like, subscribe, and walk with us through the forgotten pages of history. Because the story never truly ends, it only waits to be rediscovered. And somewhere beyond the ruins, the next revelation is already rising.